Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selina Woodruff from Core Connection. And this week we are excited to welcome Lawrence and Melissa Stone as guests on our podcast. And they are going to share with us some life experiences that they have had and learned and grown from. And so before we do that, I have this week's parenting moment. So many of our listeners are aware that I have a son with some special needs, and his primary special needs is that he is tube fed. And he's also got some pretty severe allergies. And so we don't go anywhere without certain supplies for him: Benadryl, EpiPen, G-tube supplies, right? So he's 6 years old. And normally at this point with my other two, I was kind of comfortable letting them venture into, maybe a neighbor's house by themselves or with a sibling. And I've been really reluctant to do that with my 6-year-old for these kind of obvious reasons, right? Because special needs can be a little scary. And he really wanted to go to the neighbor's house with his sister. And finally, one day I just said, you know what? Go ahead. Just do it. And it was kind of a big deal for me to let go of that control and to just say, you know what? It's going to be fine. And a lot of it is just, again, it's in my own head, and it's just this desire that we have for control and my need to protect him and not trying to put the burden on somebody else. And I'm like, I know these people, they're going to be okay. If something happens, I'm literally right there. And it turned out fine. He was fine. He went over there. He did great. It was fine. He came home the exact same kid as when he left, but I had changed. So I felt like that was pretty relatable, because as parents, dang it can be really hard to let go sometimes and to let go of that control. But it's important to do as our kids age and need their independence.
Good for you. And you just learned you actually have no control. Darn it.
I know.
But I'm glad he was safe, because that built your confidence and your trust that he's going to be okay.
Yeah. And I did get practice when he started kindergarten this year. That was another difficulty, is like, oh, I'm going to let somebody else take care of him that's not me. Like, am I ready for this? And the answer is yes, I was. And it was honestly been great him going to kindergarten. But I understand the struggle for parents, especially parents with special needs, because, well, usually they have special needs and it's scary, right? And so, it can be difficult to let go of control. But I promise, with practice, you can do it. Okay, so Melissa is going to introduce her and Lawrence and kind of what we're going to get into this week.
Yeah, so we're really excited to join you guys this week. My name is Melissa Stone and my husband is Lawrence. We have been married for 17 years. We actually met while going to school at BYU, Idaho, but we met at Walmart, because you can find anything at Walmart. And we both studied music. Lawrence studied jazz bass. I studied music education. And then we kind of went on with life and wound up doing different things. Lawrence is a business coach, and I am a nail technician and a doTERRA wellness advocate, as well as I am my kid's mom, which is the greatest title that I could ever hold. We have 6 amazing children, and 2 of those children live in heaven. 13, almost 14 years ago, our oldest daughter died in a car accident. Her name's Ethne, and our son, Thomas, was born 8 years ago. And then we have 3 living sons and a living daughter that we get to love on at home and teach about their siblings and all of the things that come with being bereaved parents.
We are super glad that you guys are here, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more today about your story of how you both kind of walked through these incredibly difficult struggles and challenges. I don't know that there's a more difficult thing to experience in this life than losing a child, and then to do it again. Super hard things. And Selina and I know Melissa and Lawrence personally. They're in our neighborhood and wonderful people, and we've gotten to know their family a little bit. So we're kind of excited to kind of hear how they've been able to get through these difficulties, and hopefully some of our listeners can gain a little something from what they're going to share with us today. So thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
So, why don't we start with kind of the grieving process? And as Jeremiah said, I mean, there can't be much that's harder in this life to go through than the loss of a child. And that's certainly not to mitigate other people's losses or struggles, but man, it's got to be pretty painful to lose a child. So let's start there with the grieving process. And you mentioned before that it was different for each of you. And I think that's a really good place to start because grief is so unique. So why don't we start with breaking that down?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's one thing Melissa I forgot to mention is we just published a book called Our Stories, and talking about grief and how we both experience grief in a different way. And in the introduction of our book, we actually talk about this a little bit. And I think part of it is men and women are going to see things differently. And we certainly saw that as people gave us books to read. I noticed most of those books were written by women, and I just wasn't connecting with what they were going through and what they were struggling with. But when you look at the word helpmeet in the scriptures, it's the Hebrew origins are actually talking about how men and women are the opposites. And the way they're a helpmeet is that they help each other see things from different perspectives. They help each other, work things and view things differently. And so that's just part of how we're created and how we were made. And as we went along in our grief process, I noticed that I needed support that was different than the way Melissa needed it. Also, it was a struggle for Melissa because it was a car accident. She was in the car. She was the one driving the car with Ethne. And so her grief was also going to be different because of that as well. But the important thing is that we held on to each other. In high school, I had a classmate who died in a car accident. He was also, went to church with me, and I knew him growing up. And I remember a year or so later talking to my mom about it, and she said everyone was watching what his parents would do because his parents' marriage was a little rocky. And she told me that losing a child will either make or break a marriage. Mm-hmm. And so when I knew that Ethne was taken by life flight helicopter to the hospital, as was Melissa, my focus on my prayers were on them. And for some reason, I knew Melissa was going to come out and be okay. It was mostly on Ethne I was worried about. So a lot of my energy was focused on praying for Ethne and that she would be okay. And once we got to the hospital, she died shortly after arrival. And all of my thoughts and all of my concentration was on, I'm not going to let this break my marriage, because that conversation with my mother was in my head. And so my focus became on, I need to help Melissa get through this. And that became important because even though she was grieving differently and she needed different things and things that I didn't want to do and I didn't want to participate in, I knew that she needed me there to help her get through that. And because that became my focus, we're able to go and move through that grief together. One of those big things that was important for Melissa was counseling. And well, why don't you talk about that, Melissa? Tell a little bit about that.
Yeah. So not long after the accident, a lot of people kept telling me, you need to go see a counselor. You need to see a counselor. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really feel like I needed to, but everybody kept saying I should. So I did, because I'm kind of a people pleaser. And I started with one-on-one counseling through LDS Family Services. And I couldn't find a good fit. And mm-hmm. if I'd known then what I know now, I probably would have done a little more hunting, because when you're looking for a counselor for something traumatic like losing a child, you want to find someone who's at least been through something kind of similar to what you've been through, so that they have greater empathy and they kind of know how to walk you through the things that you're feeling and experiencing. And the counselor that I saw didn't know what to do with me. I would just go into her office and sob for an hour straight and walk out with the biggest headache, and she didn't know what to do. But the University of Utah Hospital puts on grief counseling groups for people with similar experiences to gather together and to mourn together and to learn to walk through this experience together. And one of the groups that they put on was for parents who had lost a child. And it was led by a man who had lost his son several years previously. And so we joined this group, and that was about 4 months or so after the accident. And I really wanted Lawrence to go with me for a lot of reasons. I was struggling with a lot of social anxiety, and I still do, not as much as I used to, but it's still there. And so I wanted Lawrence to be there just so that I had something to hold on to. And he came with me, and there were 4 other women in the group, one who had lost her daughter on the same day as us in a very similar manner, and then 2 older women. So there were 4 of us total. There were 2 other women who had both lost sons a little older, and then there was one couple that came once and then didn't come back, and they had lost a baby to SIDS, and it was kind of heartbreaking that they didn't come back. But those other 3 women kept saying, oh yeah, I want my husband to come. I think he's going to come next week. He said he's going to come next time. And you could kind of see a change in their demeanor the further and further we got into this 6-week group. When their husbands wouldn't come, kind of they were deflated. And by the end, they had no more hope that their husbands would come. And having Lawrence there really lended me a lot of strength. I was able to lean on him, and he was able to kind of voice some of the things that I struggled to voice.
And it was interesting. I mean, you look at it, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be part of a group whenever I was going to be vulnerable, where I might cry in front of people. Like, that is not anything that I wanted to do. And so I understand why these men didn't want to go. But because I was so focused on, I know Melissa needs this. I know that if I don't go, she's not going to go. And so because my primary responsibility, if you will, was her and her recovery, I forced myself to go. And I'm really glad that I ended up doing it, because yeah, I think it was really beneficial for both of us. I got a lot out of it as well. And it was, a good opportunity to connect with people. And especially as I saw these women wishing that their husband would come even just once, it really emphasized to me how important it was for me to be there for Melissa.
Yeah, I love that you were able to support her in that way, and to even recognize that, when we go through traumatic experiences, sometimes it's really hard to see the needs of somebody else in that experience. And for you to have that capacity to step into that role, to be her support and her strength is so powerful. And I would guess that played a very big role in recovering and working through, those struggles that you guys both experienced with the loss of your daughter.
And especially in being able to maintain that marital relationship. And I appreciate you bringing up that aspect, because grief is so complicated and it's so unique and it's so individual that I can completely see what Lawrence was saying, when a loss like this can either make or break a marriage. And so I really appreciate that the focus was maintaining that marriage. And I also think that it is really helpful to have something to focus on, almost like something to grasp onto. It's kind of like a lifeline. Okay, we can't change this horrendous loss that we've just experienced, but what can I hold on to in the meantime? And it sounds like, Lawrence, for you, it was your marriage. My marriage is now going to be my lifeline, and something that I can cling to help me through this difficult, so difficult. I mean, difficult is an understatement situation.
Why don't you guys maybe share with us a little bit about what led you to write the book? Like, what was kind of driving that for you guys? It's been quite a few years now since her passing, and you've decided to write this book. So share with us what was happening for you there.
That was a little bit more of my doing, if you will. Melissa wasn't as excited about it as I was. But I remember within the first couple of days after the accident, this prompting coming to me and saying, pay attention to what's going on, because you're going to have to write a book about it one day. And so that was, it always had kind of sat in the back of my mind. This is going to happen at some point. This is going to happen at some point. And as life went on, we had what's referred to as a rainbow baby, is the child you have after you lose a child. And our son, he was born with a life-threatening illness called Hirschsprung's disease. And he had to have a couple of surgeries before he was about 6, 7 months old in order to help take care of that. And it's an issue with the bowels. He had to have part of his colon removed, and it's caused a lot of bowel management issues and stuff that we've had to deal with going forward. He had a colostomy bag for the first 6 months of his life, and then later on when we have this stillbirth, all this time I'm thinking you need to be writing about this. And at first I was a great journaler. In fact, journaling was part of what helped me deal with my grief, is that time to just sit down and meditate and just, no one else was around. If I needed to cry, I was able to write stuff down. Journaling really helps me process things and helps me line things up so they make sense. And so journaling became a very important part of that. But as life went on, I was less consistent with that journaling. And then when Joseph was having this life threatening illness, I got back into journaling for a little bit. And then again, when we had Thomas and we lost Thomas, I got back into journaling a little bit. And every time I was doing that, I was like, okay, I'm paying attention so I can write this book. And somewhere along the way, I realized, even though we're supporting each other and going through the same journey, we were having these two different experiences with our grief. Because especially at the beginning, journaling was not something that was helping Melissa out so much. And, talking to me was more helpful, whereas I didn't want to be in front of people when I was vulnerable. And about 7 years ago, we decided to move back to Idaho. And a few years later, I decided, okay, it's no more excuses. We had our last son, and we said, okay, I said, we're going to write this book. And I started writing it, and I told Melissa, once you start writing, you can write your side, because it's written in two voices. So you read a section that's from me, and then you read a section that's from Melissa, and we try to tell our stories as we're going along from each of our perspectives. And it took a while to get that first draft done, and then we trying to see if publishers would be interested in it, and none of them ever seemed to be interested in it. We rewrote it 3 or 4 or 5 times by the time we were done. We had some beta readers look at it. My sister, as a librarian, she has a master's degree as a librarian, and she does some editing for self-publishers and different things. And so she was a great guide to help us out as we went through the book. But it was really about 3.5 years ago when we finally were like, okay, we're writing it. And then we finally released it not quite a month ago.
Seeing the different perspectives from both of you and what you experienced, and being able to validate that people grieve differently and that it's okay, and to be able to find that journey for yourself and find that help and comfort and support for each other. That's beautiful to have both perspectives in that book. That's awesome.
There's no right or wrong way to grieve, as I'm sure you guys experienced, and grief is so unique, and grief is also non-linear. So it comes in waves and it changes. And, people sometimes talk about the 5 stages of grief. Those stages are also very much not linear, and maybe not even something that everybody's going to experience. And so grief, it changes, it evolves, but it's one of those things that it stays with you. And obviously the grief is the most intense, it's the most painful right after the event. So can you share with us now, what does your grief look like at this point in your lives? What is this grief like for you?
You talked about how a lot of times it feels heaviest right after the event. And a lot of people will tell you that the first year after losing a loved one is the hardest year. And we tend to disagree, because in that first year, you kind of live in a little bit of a fog. Mm-hmm. And you're just kind of going through the motions. And sometimes you don't really feel that grief until you hit kind of year 2, when society and the world at large thinks you should be over it. And it's not, that's not a thing. It's like you said, it's not something you get over. Lawrence's grandparents lost a child. He was 5, 6. How old was Billy Lawrence?
He was 5 when he died.
Tragic accident. And they both lived into their 90s, and you could still see the grief in them years and years and years later. I think his grandmother put it the best I've ever heard it, is that it never goes away. You just learn how to carry it. You build those muscles and you carry it better. For us, sometimes it hits the hardest on anniversaries.
Yeah.
So like September 17th, which was the day that I delivered Thomas, it kind of tends to hit pretty hard around then. And then November 11th was Ethne's birthday. And February 6th was the date of the accident. And those kind of tend to be the days that it hits, especially me, the hardest. And I kind of tend to avoid looking at calendars when I know those dates are coming up. And even though I avoid looking at that date, my body knows. And it kind of puts the brake on. And I really do have to kind of slow down. And a lot of times what that means is that I spend a lot more time taking naps and snuggling with my other 4 kids and just slowing down and savoring the time that I have with my living kids and telling stories about Ethne. We don't have a lot of stories about Thomas because he was stillborn, but talking about them with our kids, and we have pictures of them up in our house, and just helping our children know that they're always part of our family. And that's a big part of us living onward with the grief.
I love that direction from Lawrence's grandmother about building those muscles to carry it. I don't think I've ever heard it put that way, but it makes so much sense to me. You know, I've always thought about loss as learning to live without them and learning to live with the events that transpired to take them from this world. But I think I appreciate deeply that idea of building those muscles to carry it, because you're going to carry it the rest of your life. It doesn't go away. You don't get over it. That's just nonsense. But we can learn from it, and we can grow from it, and we can become strengthened through those struggles and those challenges. And most importantly, and it kind of feels like this is very important to both of you, is that you guys have drawn closer to one another and strengthened your relationship through the grief and the struggles. Not that it's been easy. I'm sure there's been lots of challenges even in the relationship moving forward, but to be able to turn inward towards one another instead of away from one another has got to be just a great source of strength for both of you.
I think that's amazing, Melissa, that you've been able to figure out yourself and what you need. And instead of being mad or frustrated about the way that you handle it or what you need to be able to grieve, that's awesome that you can accept that and accept who you are and what you need. And you allow it. You allow it to be hard. You allow the naps and the snuggles, and you don't beat yourself up about it even years later, that you're able to accept that that's what it is and that's what you need. And I loved how you talked with your kids. And that was a question I had, was how do you feel like it affects your kids now? And you kind of touched on it, but how do you keep their memories and keep their siblings? Like, how do you include that with the children that you have?
Our living kids are very, very aware of Ethne and Thomas. And sometimes I've wondered, especially with our youngest, who's 5, if maybe we've talked about them less and if he knows who they are. But the other day he actually sat down and he said, "Hey, Mommy, does Thomas live in heaven?" And he said, "Yeah, Thomas is in heaven." He says, "And he's buried in Utah." And I'm like, "He's 5. And I said, "Yep, he's buried in Utah." And he says, "He's with Ethne?" And yeah, he's with Ethne, buddy. And, you know, realizing that he is listening, he is paying attention, and he does know that they're part of our family. Sometimes it's funny because I think our older kids catch people off guard because, you know, you're out in public, people ask, "How many kids do you have?" And especially our oldest, when he was younger, he would tell people all the time, "Oh yeah, I have an older sister who lives in heaven." And I think that caught people off guard a lot. But one of the big ways that we keep their memory alive and we make sure that our kids know them is that we celebrate their birthdays and we include them in Christmas. We try to do service projects in honor of their birthdays. So some of the things that we've done is, like, we've served meals at the Ronald McDonald House. Because their birthdays are kind of close, we tend to combine them. But we also have like cake and ice cream and candles for their birthdays. And then when it comes to Christmas, we purchase gifts for them that we turn around and donate. Like, we'll do angel tree gifts for children that are close in age to them, or we've just bought things and donated them to like foster care or foster care closets, because foster care is something that's important to our family. I have a brother that was adopted through foster care. And then, like I mentioned, we have pictures of them up in our home so that our kids know who they are and they see them with our family. We actually just had family pictures taken, and we have these stuffed elephants. Anytime you see our family picture, there's stuffed elephants in our pictures that represent both Ethne and Thomas.
beautiful thing, though. You took this really hard thing that you continually deal with, and you've taught your children that you can overcome and you can see beautiful, good things that can come from it, and that you can continue to share and teach them from this opportunity. That's amazing. You guys can do that.
I love the service projects and the gifts. Like, that is such an amazing idea. I don't know where you got that from, but wow, that is such a perfect way to honor them and to remember them and to bless the lives of others. I know that one of the greatest ways we can work through our grief is to serve somebody else. And so, what a great example you're teaching your children and you're experiencing for yourself, and somebody else's life is blessed through those efforts to honor those children who have passed.
The service
Another-
projects were really Lawrence's idea. It was just, we were trying to exemplify the love that Ethne had for everyone. The girl was kind of fearless and had no stranger danger, and she would hug and wave at anyone. And when we were looking back on her life and the way that she loved was something that we wanted to exemplify.
Did I come up with that? I thought you came up with that. Am I remembering it wrong?
Just go with it, Lawrence. Go with it. Just be
Take the
like,
credit.
yeah, me.
So another thing that I noticed that you guys have done is you've created this culture in your home of grief is okay. And I don't think every family gets to experience that. And so I really appreciate the modeling that you guys have done for your kids, and just this idea that you've created that I can grieve and I can go through hard things and I can learn to carry heavy burdens and still find joy. And one of the things that I always like to say is finding joy and choosing to put your focus on joy never means pretending away the bad or pretending away the hard. And so, from my perspective, you guys find so much joy and fulfillment in your 4 children that are here on this earth. And that doesn't mitigate your loss, and it doesn't mean you're trying to pretend away something hard and horrible that's happened to you, but it does mean that you're creating a narrative for yourselves, and you are choosing where to put your focus and energy rather than just getting so wrapped up in this awful loss that I've had. You're showing your kids, hey, I can go through this loss, this awful experience. I can cope. I can be resilient, and I can grow. I can learn, and I can be okay. I can learn to live with really hard things.
Well, one thing I was thinking about what Liz was just talking about, and it's interesting because we definitely had our struggles going through grief, and we certainly had our moments of doubt. We had our moments of even depression and things of that nature. But it's interesting because I remember hearing Tony Robbins say something to the effect of, "You need to find a way to make your worst day your best day," and through gratitude and how important that is. And it's interesting because talk about, oh, I'm grateful that my daughter died. Like that's absurd. Like that sounds horrific, right? But there's so many good things that have happened as a result of it. Now I'd give anything to have her back for sure. But because we went through that, I find that me personally, I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better member of my community. Our marriage is so much stronger than it ever could have been. You hear a lot of people talk about the 7-year itch, and you find that there's divorce rates that they go up around every 7 years. It's 17, 7 and 14 and 21 around those years. Marriages struggle, and as Melissa and I've gone forward, she mentioned we've been married just over 17 years now, and we've never really had that 7-year itch because we've had to go through so much and we've endured so much, and we find that our ability to communicate has dramatically improved as we're going through things. That doesn't mean it's perfect. We still have our struggles with it, and sometimes there's things we don't want to talk about. But we found a way to work with each other and be able to work through things, and our ability to communicate and do that has increased so much. And even having to relive that, there was a lot of when Thomas was born still, there was a lot of regression into that grief and having to relearn that and realize, okay, just because we went through it once doesn't mean we can stop being resilient. We have to continue to be resilient. We still have to continue to work through things. And again, that was a rebuilding process of, okay, we can move through it. And even though we still had that grief there, we were able to get stronger faster. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It
we
does.
were we were able to see, at least I was. I can't speak for Melissa on this, but I was able to foresee some things once I saw how bad Melissa especially was regressing after that. I could call back to things we'd gone through before, and yeah, I didn't want to go through them again, but it helped prepare me so I knew some of the things I was going to be expecting going forward.
You knew the steps you needed to take to move forward and to manage that grief within yourself. And so knowing and understanding that would definitely help you move a little bit faster through that process than you probably went through the first time around. So it does make
Yeah,
sense.
I was able to see what Melissa was going to go through as well, or have at least an idea. And even though I prayed that some of it I wouldn't have to go through again, or we wouldn't have to go through again, when it happened, it wasn't as much of a surprise either on her side.
You built calluses you probably didn't want.
Right.
Having to go through it a second time. You didn't want the calluses, but they were there, and they do help, but that doesn't make one loss harder or easier than the other. It just makes, probably I would imagine that each loss was very different, would be my guess. I mean, and obviously they are different just in the circumstance and everything, but I would imagine that would also make the grieving process different for each loss as well.
Yes, the grieving process was different, but for me, I felt a lot of guilt on both sides. I was driving the car in the accident with Ethne, and with Thomas, I was supposed to be this safe home and grow this baby, and somewhere along the way, something went wrong. And so I dealt with a lot of guilt on both sides, and there are still days when I experience a lot of that guilt. But having Lawrence reassure me kind of constantly, especially in that first year after the accident, that it wasn't my fault, that nobody blamed me, that helped a lot. But there are still, like I said, there are still days when I beat myself up over it, and I'm finding forgiveness for myself. It was a lot easier to forgive the cement truck driver. I had an unpleasant experience with a doctor when I lost Thomas, and it's been easier to forgive him than it is to kind of forgive myself. But yeah, I've tried really hard to work through that.
Self-forgiveness is such a challenge. Sometimes we get real good at beating ourselves up and being hard on ourselves, and it's a little bit easier to let the rest of the world slide when things go wrong than it is ourselves. So I commend you for that work and that continued work that's probably going to go on throughout the rest of your life. And what a great source of strength to have Lawrence there to reassure that and to reinforce that it isn't your fault. It wasn't your choice or your decision to make any of these things happen. Sometimes that's the plan that's in front of us and the experiences that we have the opportunity to go through and to learn from. So we appreciate you sharing that, Melissa. I know that's tough. Melissa, would you share with us? We know Lawrence was a little bit more gung ho about the book, and it sounds like you were maybe a little bit more hesitant. So how did that kind of come about for you, and where were you at as you guys went through that process?
So in the accident, I received a traumatic brain injury. I had a skull fracture, and because of that, it made it difficult for me to remember a lot of kind of that first year. And then sitting down and writing and reading was really difficult for that first year. So I don't have the journals like Lawrence had from that first year. So that makes it difficult for me to write my experiences and the things that I remembered. And then it was a lot of that guilt and feeling like I was going to be judged majorly for the things that I experienced and the way that I grieved. But again, having that support from Lawrence really helped me to be like, okay, I can do this. And then I started sharing a lot on Instagram and seeing a lot of other bereaved mothers sharing their stories kind of gave me a little bit more courage to share. And then one mom that I followed issued a challenge to do something scary for yourself that maybe your child that you had lost would want you to do. And that kind of really motivated me. And so over about the course of a month, I sat down pretty regularly and really got my side of the story down. And then it took some refining, some editing and stuff. And it was easier after kind of that 1 month push to get it all done. But I found a lot of strength and motivation through others sharing as well.
And it's a vulnerable thing to share something so personal. And I think it's also so normal to worry, what are people going to think, to feel judged? I mean, because when you publish a book, you're shining a giant spotlight on yourself. And that's genuinely a scary thing. And so, I really appreciate the vulnerability that you shared and moving past this. And I would imagine that your experience with this book and with sharing this story has received an overall positive reception from everybody, and probably just, appreciating your willingness to be vulnerable. And I would imagine there hasn't been a whole lot of judgment in terms of, or just negativity from this experience would be my guess.
I think anyone could find great value in reading your book, being able to understand your story and have compassion and help others that are going through it and learn from it, and also learn for ourselves of turning around such a hard thing and how we can use that to help our families. So thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for being an inspiration in our life of overcoming hard things and being great people.
Yeah, I just want to throw this out there. It's interesting. We've gotten really good feedback so far from the book. It's only been out for a few weeks, but the feedback's been really good. I don't even know if I told Melissa this, but I was thinking about it the other day. I look forward to getting to the point where we start getting some naysayers, if you will, and some negative feedback. Because at that point, that tells me that our book's getting attention, because nobody's going to be opposing it until we have attention. And once all of a sudden, when we hit that point, I actually kind of look forward to that point when we get some of those naysayers, when we get some of those people who are upset about something we say or just trying to be controversial. Like, to me, that's actually something I look forward to. I hope we get enough attention that something like that happens.
Yeah,
we could help you out with that.
I don't know. Our audience can't see Melissa's response. So when we record our podcast, we could see everybody on the podcast for our listeners out there. And Melissa, you didn't seem so excited about the naysayers.
I mean, it's hard, but I'm learning to let them, Jamie Kern Lima says that haters are really people who think that you're awesome in disguise, basically. So
those were the exact words I was thinking when you were saying, "Oh, I'm worried about sharing my story." I was going to say, let them be negative, let them judge, let them say what they want to say, because that's on them and that's for them to deal with and not for you. Keep being good and showing other people how we can work through these hard things that life gives us.
Kind of as we begin to wrap things up with our session today, what would you guys like to share with our audience that you feel like could be most beneficial?
We like to share some key ways that you can support someone who is experiencing grief or child loss. And so I'll let Lawrence share the first one.
Yeah, we get this question all the time from people when they know that someone's dealing with grief or losing a loved one, even if it's a child or something else. It's, even if they're losing a child or something else, it's interesting because they want to know, how can we support them? And the first thing I tell people, and the biggest way, is I say you can pray for them and let them know that you're praying for them. And it seems simple. It doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it really is. I know, especially for me, but I think for Melissa too, it was very empowering and very uplifting to know that there were so many people out there supporting us, wanting the best for us, praying for us. And I remember, and I even talk about this in the book, there was one moment where I was driving down the road and I was just feeling very down. And all of a sudden, I could imagine all these people who said that they were praying for us all of a sudden just came to my mind. And I knew that there are people who loved us and wanted us to get through it. And so just knowing that someone is praying for you, or even sending good thoughts, because not everyone said they prayed for us. I have family members who aren't religious, but they said they were sending good thoughts our way. And even those good thoughts were uplifting and motivating to us. And so that's the first thing I tell people is, if you don't know what to do, just pray for them and let them know that you're praying for them.
The second thing that we always tell people is that if you are in proximity or you're wanting to do something a little more tangible, a little more earthly that can help, is be specific in the ways that you're offering help. Don't go to someone who's grieving and say, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Because that's just adding one more thing to their plate. A lot of times they're not thinking straight, or they're just barely keeping their head above water. And so, for example, if you want to help them, say, I'd like to bring you dinner. Is Tuesday or Thursday a good night? And that way it kind of takes some of that weight off their shoulders. We had a lot of people who even took things out of a conversation. For example, I had a friend who I hadn't seen in years, and she came and visited, and Lawrence mentioned, because she worked at a bakery, Lawrence mentioned how much he loved the pumpkin chocolate chip bread from this specific bakery, and she showed up a couple days later with some of that pumpkin chocolate chip bread for Lawrence. And so just showing up in very specific ways and not asking them to tell you how to show up really makes a big difference. And the last thing that we tell people is, and this is mostly for parents who have lost children, say their names. Ask them about their babies, because you're not reminding them that their baby is gone. They know that their baby is gone every moment of every day. And what helps lift us up is to hear our babies' names and to talk about the life that they had, or to talk about how they may be influencing you. And so just say their babies' names.
And on that too, it's one of the big things that parents fear when their child passes is that their child will be forgotten. So even there might be some parents who are in a spot where they can talk a lot about it, but recognizing it, sending them a text message even, or calling them on that child's birthday, or even on the anniversary when they passed away, that goes a long way to letting them know we have not forgotten about your child.
I especially appreciate that last one, because I feel like, as you said, after a year, the world expects you to just get over it. And as you said, you never do. But I think, what tends to happen is when this really big and terrible event happens, we tend to push so much support and so much love, and then life goes on, and maybe we feel like that support drops off. So I really appreciate, and I love this idea of, hey, I know you guys are maybe feeling in a better place, but I still remember this event, and I'm still thinking about you, and I still care about your grieving process.
Yeah, it's a very big deal.
Well, we
Okay.
appreciate you guys coming on and sharing this information with us. And I love those kind of 3 different tips of how to support and love those who are going through difficult things like that, because it can be very difficult, because fortunately there's a good portion of people in the world who don't understand what that's like. And so that direction can be super helpful. And we just appreciate you guys sharing. And we'll have links for the book in our show notes, and it'll go out with our email for the book for our listeners who would like to read it.
Yes, thank you for letting us be on and be able to talk about it.
We really appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to share such deep, emotional, and painful things with the world. And so I want to recognize the strength and the courage and the vulnerability that takes. So last week, we mentioned that we were supposed to get into relationships with adult children. And as you guys obviously know, we've had to shift some things around. So next week, we are going to get into relationships with adult children. And that episode also took a little bit of a different turn. So it's going to focus more on launching children. And as Jeremiah mentioned, I will have their book listed in our show notes. There will be an Amazon link for that book if you are interested in purchasing that. And we will see you all next week. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.